Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Loeb. I'm the Senior Director of Cultural Arts at the JCC of Metro Detroit, and I'm very glad you're with us tonight. This evening, we have a presentation by Jamie Bernstein and Ted Chapin, and we are very excited to have them. It's a presentation by the Detroit Jewish Book Fair. So on behalf of the whole committee and the staff, welcome. We are glad you're here with us. For those of you who have been joining the JCC of Metro Detroit at our virtual events over the last few months, you will know that this is a new platform for us. We have moved from Zoom for our events to here we are on YouTube. We know that this, in the end, will be a better experience for you, more secure, a lot simpler. Some of you may be watching on your TVs, for example. So just bear with us as we make this transition to a new system. And while you're here, be sure to subscribe to the JCC of Metro Detroit's YouTube channel, which is where we are. You can also click the little bell to get reminders, like this video. All of those things will help you keep up to date with when we post new videos or have new live events. So if you are watching on your computer, if you put a comment below down there, we will see it as it comes in. And our guests will do their best to take as many questions as they can. You can also text us your questions to this number, and we will put that back on the screen, so don't worry if you forget it. And as I said, we'll take as many questions as we can, but obviously we will not get to all of them. So speaking of our comment section, hello to those of you joining us from the CATS JCC in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Thank you for being with us tonight. And I know that we may have groups from other JCCs around the country. So if you're joining us from somewhere, let us know where, because we want to say hello. The Cultural Arts Department at the JCC of Metro Detroit has a lot of exciting events coming up, including a discussion between last year's winner and this year's winner of the Jewish Book Council, the Jewish Book Award for Debut Fiction. So last year's winner, this year's winner are going to discuss fiction and Jewish writing and all sorts of exciting things. We hope you'll join us for that. And you can check out all of our new events, our Facebook group, our email list, all of those sorts of things. And of course, ways to support our work. You can check all of that out here at this beautiful, beautiful website. The link is also in the description of this video, of course. So speaking of ways to support our work, we are really thrilled. We've been able to provide a lot of free programming in the last few months during these challenging times. But of course, we need your help to continue doing this. If you enjoy this program, if you've enjoyed other JCC of Metro Detroit cultural arts presentations, please consider making a donation. You can do that, of course, right down here. We also have an online bookstore, and all of these proceeds go right to the Cultural Arts Department to help us provide innovative, interesting, world-class programming throughout the pandemic, but also well into the future. And now to tonight's event. We are really excited to have with us tonight Ted Chapin and Jamie Bernstein. Jamie Bernstein is a broadcaster, a filmmaker, concert narrator, and a 2018 Book Fair alum. She travels extensively speaking about music as well as about her father, Leonard Bernstein. Her most recent book, Famous Father Girl, is available at our online bookstore and highly recommended. It's a great read from top to bottom. Ted Chapin is a longtime friend of Jamie's and president of the Rodgers and Hammerstein office, a position he's held for 30 years. He spearheaded many Broadway productions and really left an indelible mark on the musical theater world of this country. His father, Schuyler Chapin, was general manager of the Metropolitan Opera and commissioner of cultural affairs in New York City, and of course, a friend and colleague to Leonard Bernstein. So welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
And away we go.
Thank you, Jamie. Jamie there and Jamie there. This is an honor, and I'm thrilled to be asked to do this. As the one Jamie mentioned, the other Jamie and I have known each other for years through the connection
between
our fathers. No, that's okay, because I have some things I want to say later on about the relationship between my father and Jamie's father, because I actually did some research and found an interesting little item which I wanted to throw into it. But to start, I want to read a review of Jamie's book, which I just think sort of sums up what we're going to be talking about. This is from The New Yorker when the book came out. And The New Yorker said, "The existence of this well-written book, with its poignancy and its shuddery detail, is a mark of Jamie Bernstein's sanity and survival." And I have to say, I think that clearly Jamie Bernstein is a survivor, and she is among the sanest people that I know. So welcome, and honored to be here. Now, I wanted to start, as they say, sort of at the beginning. This book has a wonderful, wonderful title. Where did you come up with that title?
Okay. Thank you, Ted. And I hope I cling to my sanity going forward, because it's all very challenging right now. But
yes,
so far, we're all hanging in there. So when I was in second grade, my classmate, Lisa, used to call me this to tease me, famous father girl. And it was sort of rude and annoying. But all these years later, I decided it was a great title for my book. One, because it is kind of annoying and kind of pokes you in the eye. I kind of like that.
Right.
And it's also, there's nothing coy about it. It tells you exactly what the book is about. And I like that too. It just kind of, cut to the chase. And yup, my father was famous. And now I'm going to tell you what it was like to have grown up in that environment. So it just kind of went right there without any coyness or making it poetic or making it anything that it was not.
It was great. How famous was your father when you were in second grade?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, the reason that Lisa called me famous father girl is that my father was on television. And back then, in the late 1950s, early 1960s, being on television was the most important thing that could happen to anybody in the eyes of us younger folk. Everything was about television. And, back in those days, we only had the three networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and a couple of local stations. And so everybody pretty much watched the same things, which is why my father's young people's concerts with the New York Philharmonic had such a tremendous impact on more than one generation. Because in those days, as I love to explain to young people today, the entire family would sit down together in the living room in front of their single screen in their house and all watch the same thing, depending on whether, who in the house got to decide or did they vote, I don't know. But the chances were that an entire family of multiple generations would sit down together to watch Leonard Bernstein talk about music and perform it with the New York Philharmonic in the young people's concerts. So when I talk to the young people and I tell them about how it used to be, I then say, so how many screens do you have in your house? Go ahead, count them up. You have to count all the TVs and all the laptops and all the tablets and all the phones. And maybe you have a screen for your intercom, and I bet you have a screen in your car when you're backing up, all that stuff. And so count them up. Have you run out of fingers yet? And the kids get so excited counting up their screens. But it's a great way to demonstrate how the world has changed since then. And it also explains why Leonard Bernstein made such a gigantic impact with those young people's concerts. But anyway, to answer your question directly, so he was already famous all the way back then because of television.
Right.
So somewhere in that period, the penny really dropped for Alexander, my brother, Nina, my sister, and me when we were watching the Flintstones. And Betty and Wilma were going to the Holly Rock Bowl to hear Leonard Bernstein conduct. And when we heard his name on the Flintstones, we just flipped out. Oh, they mentioned him on the Flintstones?
That's Dad.
Really a big time.
You had said in a conversation that I attended that you felt your father was very lucky to be alive when he was alive. And it's sort of what you just said, I think, is part of it, but expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's true. It was kind of the magic combo, was that my father and television came up simultaneously together because they were made for each other. You know, television in the post-World War II era, there was a tremendous interest in culture. And now that we were in peacetime, everybody was very interested in the United States and in the middle class. They were all interested in boning up on literature and theater and art and poetry. And then everybody wanted to know about everything. And there was some kind of value ascribed to having that knowledge. I'm not sure that's true today, but it was true back then. So that's why when CBS was just starting to be a network, they were desperate for content. They didn't have enough content. They had all these stations and nothing to put on them. And so they were looking for cultural programming because that's what people were interested in back then. And so when my father came to Mr. Paley of CBS and said, hey, how about putting the young people's concerts on TV? Mr. Paley said, yeah, great idea.
Also, I love the fact that the omnibus, which was not for young people, but, you know, a CBS program where your father talked about music, was sort of an adult program. So the idea that he could talk to adults and then realize that there was something, as you and I both know, incredibly magical about the young people's concerts.
Right. Well, you know, the young people's concerts already existed,
Really?
Not on television, but in real life. And I can't remember the name of the conductor who used to do them on Saturday mornings for the kids.
Tommy Sherman,
No,
I was dragged to those as a kid. They were terrible.
Oh, they were terrible. Whoever this guy was, he went by Uncle, whatever his name was.
Right,
so already you're like, but they were popular and they were sold out, in fact. And so having a subscription to the young people's concerts was like a hot ticket that you handed down in your family, stuff like that. But then when Leonard Bernstein took them over and put them on TV, then it was a really hot ticket, and he was reaching millions of people.
He was also an American at a time when symphony orchestras liked older Europeans with unpronounceable names often. You know, he was young, he was a Jewish. I mean, all of those things, I think, in terms of the luckiness of when he was there, it was clearly the world was waiting for Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah, it's true. His timing was really good.
Yeah.
And, you know, his debut was such good timing, too. The Young People's Concerts went on TV in 1958, but he got his big break in 1943. So that was like 15 years earlier. When he had to take over at the last minute and conduct for Bruno Walter, who was sick. And he went on to the podium as the assistant conductor, the absolute 25-year-old American Jewish nobody. There was no such thing as an American-born conductor at that point. So that's why he was on the front page of the New York Times the next day when he did a really good job. And it was broadcast live nationwide on radio, which is the other reason it made such a splash. So, I mean, you know, timing.
Yeah.
And so it was a Cinderella kind of a story because the next day he was a star.
So he made his initial mark as a conductor. As his life went on, I think it's fair to say he was a conductor, composer, and a teacher. And of those three, how do you think he managed to weave them all in? Or were they, I mean, obviously conducting has a social thing that is the opposite of composing when you need to be by yourself in a room. But did he blend them all together, effortlessly, or was it a hard thing?
It was not effortless. But it's true that he had these two sides of himself. It was almost like he was two people inside the same body. And, you know, a conductor is a very outward going social person. It's all about connecting with others. It's all about communicating. And he was so good at that. And that's why he was a good teacher. I mean, everything he did was a form of teaching, whether he was rehearsing the New York Philharmonic or telling a really good Jewish joke or quoting from Lewis Carroll or whatever he was doing. It all had the same quality, even on television, of reaching out and tugging you on the sleeve and saying, listen to this. I have to share this with you because I'm so excited about it. You just have to know about this. Everything he did had that same quality, and it's what made him a good teacher, I think.
I think also I love your descriptions of growing up in a household that, the sort of normal was a party with Stephen Sondheim and Betty Comden and Adolph Green and on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah, like on page 6 or so, I have the sentence, "Let the name dropping begin."
Yes, I like that. That's a parenthetical phrase, and I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, it was sort of embarrassing to write about it. And the thing is, when you're a kid, you don't know who your parents' friends are. They're
Right.
just parents' friends who come traipsing through the house and sit in the living room drinking cocktails or sit at the dinner table and then all go back to the living room and make a big racket,
Right.
singing songs around the piano or playing charades or laughing and carrying on. I thought that was all grown-ups did, was have fun. I couldn't wait to be a grown-up. But it took me a while to realize that all these people that were my parents' friends were actually, the luminaries of mid-20th century culture, and that our parents were at the epicenter of that whole environment in New York City. And so it was quite the scene.
Yeah.
But I only figured that out later.
Talk about Lillian Hellman and your sister.
So
I love the little
Lillian
tidbits in the book that are like, will make you smile.
Lillian Hellman, the playwright, also wrote the original libretto for my father's musical Candide, which is based on the Voltaire novella. And her original idea was to have it be resonant and sort of speak to the whole communist witch hunt scare thing in the 1950s. But by the time it was on Broadway, they had extracted a lot of that element because it was so incendiary. It was so controversial at the time. But in any case, so Lillian Hellman was around a lot. She was not just a collaborator with my dad on that project and various others, but she was also a family friend. And so my parents evidently decided that she would be appointed my sister Nina's godmother. And, in our family, being a godparent did not really entail any actual duties. It was really more like an honorific. It was just a way of showing a person that they really matter to you in the family. Okay. So Lillian was appointed Nina's godmother, and my mother and Lillian were having tea at our house, and Nina was sort of hanging around at the age of 4 or 5 tops. And so our mother is explaining about how Lillian is Nina's godmother. And Lillian says to Nina, "That's right, kid. When the plane goes down, I getcha." And, it's a scary thing to say to a kid, but if you could have seen Lillian Hellman, what she looked like and how scary she was to all of us kids, we were terrified of Lillian Hellman. She had this craggy face and these big teeth, and when she laughed, her mouth pointed downwards. Ha ha ha! She was terrifying. So you can imagine Nina's alarm.
But you were welcomed into that world, especially in the summers. I love the way you describe that the summers were family time. You went to Martha's Vineyard for a long time, then a house in Connecticut till you got the house that you're in right now. And yes. I love the fact that it was family time. So, but you were, you didn't know who these people necessarily were, but you could play anagrams with them and you could make up songs and stuff like that.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
We were always encouraged to participate and be around. We were almost never sent off, if you know what I mean. I take that back. When we were really little, we were brought down in our pajamas, all bathed and combed and nice in our bathrobes and everything, to say hello to the grown-ups while they were having cocktails, and then were whisked away to bed. But when we got older, we were allowed to hang around with the grown-ups, and we loved the grown-ups. I never wanted to go to day camp or anything like that. Right. Certainly not sleepaway camp. I just wanted to be in the country with my parents and all their cool friends. Yeah. That was really fun.
I love the way you describe Stephen Sondheim, who I think you said is not known for being warm and fuzzy, but actually you have a great deal of affection, and he for you as well.
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting about Steve Sondheim, it is true. He was the least warm and fuzzy person you ever met back in the day. But, you know, people can change when they get older, even though supposedly they can't.
Right.
People can change when they get older. And Steve Sondheim has really changed. He's so much mellower. He's much more overtly affectionate. He expresses himself, you know, in this very warm and connected way. And, you know, I'm sure he had lots of issues, and, you know, don't we all? But he's a married man, and they live up in Connecticut most of the time, or in their townhouse in New York City, but I bet they're not there right now.
Yeah, I
They're
think you're right.
You know, doing their lockdown thing up in their beautiful country house in Connecticut with their gorgeous standard poodles whom they dote on. And, you know, Steve has a really nice, happy life. I'm so happy for him.
He's great. Actually,
he's 90, he just turned.
I know.
And
Actually,
the really bad thing, of course, was that they were going to have this tremendous celebration for him on his 90th birthday, which included the opening of this fantastic revival of his show Company on Broadway. And then all of that had to be scrapped because of the lockdown.
Yeah, it'll happen again, not exactly on his birthday, but it's interesting. I remember my father saying that he first met Steve Sondheim at LaGuardia Airport, waiting for the plane to go up to Martha's Vineyard to visit your parents, and he was sort of sitting rumpled in the corner. Cool. Yeah, but here I want to bring up my father a little bit, because as I'm sure with you, I have the books that I have here. You know, I luckily had your book because we were supposed to do something in New Jersey in April. But I looked at my father's book, and he told the following story, which I just think is so wonderful about both of them. My father was the new head of the Masterworks, which is classical division of Columbia Records, 1959. He got on the job, and with Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic were on Columbia Records. But he was said, oh, by the way, unfortunately, we let the contracts expire. So you, Schuyler, have to go and fix that. So he went to Washington, where the orchestra got back from Russia. And he says he's nervous because he never met your father. And he met, and your father said, come sit here. You know, are we okay? Have we fixed it? And the first thing that my father was able to do, he said, I want to record a Shostakovich thing in Symphony Hall in Boston, and which was the Boston Symphony, their own place. But my father managed to do that. But then the thing that I thought was great is then, okay, you know, your father said, I want to stay there, but I've been being wooed by the other companies. So then the lawyer went in and said, okay, here's what we want: a 20-year contract, an enormous amount of money, and Bernstein gets to choose the repertoire he records. And my father said he gulped, because that's giving him an awful lot of power. But he went to Goddard Lieberson, who you and I both knew, who was the head of Columbia. And Schuyler mentioned this, and Lieberson said, Schuyler, do you think this is a good idea? And he said, yeah, I do, because they're on a rise. You know, they're getting more and more popular. So it was all done. Then he sat down with your father, and your father said, I just want you to know, Schuyler, I insisted on choosing all the repertoire because I don't want anybody to tell me what to record. Now, let's you and me decide what makes sense for you and what makes sense for me. And I thought that's so, that was the essence of their relationship. My father adored and respected your father. He respected the artist. And at the end of the day, your father would say, now let's do what makes sense. That was just great.
That's great. It speaks well for both of them.
Yeah, no, and it was you know, a kind of
very pragmatic, even though it's sort of out there and has energy and.
Oh, I did. There was one quote that I wanted your response to this. This was from my father's book. He said, I learned a permanent letter of the law for Leonard Bernstein. Never accept the phrase, don't worry. Start worrying when you hear it. That was kind of great. Well, you and your siblings are masters at the gate of the world of Leonard Bernstein. And I know that I would like to say that 2 years ago you celebrated his centennial, but I don't think it's ended. It continues. You did an incredible, incredible job. I want you to talk a little bit about what that entailed, but also a thing I'd asked you a time before, what came out of that surprised you and your siblings?
Oh, well, you know, my sister Nina came up with the perfect phrase to convey how we felt about the centennial for our dad. She said, it is our unrepeatable opportunity to remind the world of who Leonard Bernstein was and what he left behind for everyone. And, you know, it was just this incredible opportunity to reach out all over the world. So we tried to figure out how we were going to do that. And we wound up figuring out that there were basically 4 categories of what Leonard Bernstein did in the world. And as you mentioned 3 of them: conductor, composer, educator, and the 4th one is activist, humanitarian, because that was so much a part of who he was, and he did it all his life. So that was kind of how we broke it all down. And then we just reached out to every organization and entity we could think of all around the world, only to remind them that the Leonard Bernstein Centennial was coming up, at which point it was up to them to cook it up however they would. I mean, you know, we can't control everything. So we didn't know what to expect. But we had this database at the Leonard Bernstein office, keeping track of all the centennial related events worldwide, at least those that we heard about. And after about 6,000 events, we started losing track a little bit of everything that was going on, to say nothing of the fact that we could not possibly attend or participate in a fraction of them. But we tried really hard.
You did. Bravo to you and your sister.
My brother. Should we all say hello to Alexander, since I'm talking about him?
Yeah, sure.
You look marvelous. Here's my brother, Alexander.
Hello, Alex.
Hi, Ted.
How are you?
I'm well. Good to see you.
Just complimenting you guys on the centennial.
Thank you.
A lot of work.
It went very well.
It went well.
And boy, did we fly around till our arms were tired. There was a lot of running around. Anyway, thanks for popping in.
Nice to see you.
Bonus.
That was a bonus, a total fun bonus. Anyway, so
And Ted, say hi to all your brothers and your family.
I certainly will. I certainly will. Great.
oh, that was fun.
Yeah.
So anyway, the centennial went great. And we all, you know, my brother and sister and I are very close. And so we were hoping to be able to do the whole centennial together. But in the end, what we had to do was, we call ourselves the 3-headed monster. But for the centennial, the 3-headed monster had to trifurcate and go all over the world because there were too many events. And so we had to sit down like, you know, generals with an army and figure out, okay, you go to Miami and I'll go to Seattle, and then you go to Vienna, and then we'll all meet in Boston, and then like that. It was just logistics. But we pulled it off, and it was so gratifying to discover how much Leonard Bernstein was still in the world and how much people loved what he left behind, his music, his recordings, which were all re-released, and his videos, both audio and video. And then all his compositions were being performed all over the world in all the incarnations. You know, there was something for everybody because he was so multifaceted. So, you know, symphonic works and choral works and ballets and Broadway shows and operas and film scores. I mean, there was just something for everybody. So it was a total thrill. And then sorry, finish the 4 things. As an educator, of course, you know, just to talk about the young people's concerts and nothing else, they have left such an intense impact in the world to this very day. Because as I found out just going around the United States, narrating concerts and meeting audience members and orchestra members, so many of them would say to me, oh, you know, I grew up in Podunk, Montana, and we didn't have live music, but I watched the young people's concerts, and that's how I discovered symphonic music, and I fell in love with it, and that's why I'm here in this audience today, or that's why I'm playing the French horn in this orchestra today. I heard it over and over and over and over again until I realized the impact is still being felt. It's still, you know, the butts in seats of concert halls are usually the butts that were sitting in front of their big TV console in the living room watching the young people's concert. That's how they started.
That's great. And there's nobody doing it today, or probably could do it quite well. You're carrying on the tradition with live concerts, live.
I do something similar,
Yeah.
but it's a different world. Even if we could sort of magically reincarnate Leonard Bernstein and put him back on the podium and stick him on CBS television, it would not have the impact today that it had back then, because everything is so pixelated and the way we receive our information is so fractured that it's not like everybody sits down and watches one program. That just never happens anymore. So the impact would be so diluted compared to what it was back in the day.
But speaking of different impacts, my sense was, and correct me if I'm wrong, that one of the pieces that came to the forefront in the centennial that had been slightly overlooked before is the Mass, the piece that was written to open the Kennedy Center. And where did you, what kind of productions of the Mass did you see in the centennial?
Well, it was really gratifying to see Mass kind of coming into its own at long last. You know, it's the piece that I think contains the most of my father in it. It was the most authentic self-expression of any work that he devised. It just has everything of him in it. And as a result, he rendered himself tremendously vulnerable by putting that piece out in the world. And when it was met with ambivalence, he was really hurt by that. So now that it's finally finding its place in the world, it's so gratifying, because it's taken a while, but it seems like Mass's time is coming around at long last. When it first came out, it was mixing up all these different genres. And today, we don't think twice about putting a rock band with a symphony orchestra. It happens all the time. Rock bands play with orchestras all the time. Nobody blinks an eye. But back then, it was like, what? He's doing what?
What did you think of it when you first saw it?
Well, I mean, I was so around while my father was composing it. And part of why he did put rock music into that score was to connect with younger people, particularly his kids. Yeah. And, my brother and I, especially Nina, was still pretty young, but Alexander and I were our dad's conduit for pop music and what we were listening to on the radio. And so the music that he was writing for Mass, it really felt like he was writing it for us. And so we were very involved in the creation of the piece. And every time he had a new section, he would call us over to the piano and throw his sketch on the rack and say, listen to what I just wrote today. What do you think of this? And so we were really in on it the whole way through. And it was commissioned to open the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington. So it was a gigantic event when this piece premiered. It was huge and very stressful, and everybody was in a state. And many of my father's collaborators on that piece were trying to persuade him to cut a lot of the music because it was way too long, but he wouldn't do it. And now I think we're all glad that he did not make those cuts, because the orchestral interludes, that was the main thing they wanted him to cut, are the part where you really feel his heart, where he really delves into his soul. There are those meditations, as they're called. They're some of the best music in the whole score. So anyway, what with one thing and the other, this piece really resonates today, and it had some fantastic performances during the centennial. And the other thing about it is that it takes a village to put on Mass, because it's such a gigantic work. It has so many forces. It has a symphony orchestra, the rock band I mentioned, the blues band, a marching band, a full adult chorus, a kids chorus, and an entire so-called street chorus, which sing in the Broadway idiom. And we also have the celebrant, who is the protagonist of the whole thing. So we're already talking about hundreds and hundreds of people who all end up on that stage together. So it's a huge thing to put on. It takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of money, and a lot of heart, and a lot of stick-to-itiveness. And so it is a great piece for universities and for communities that are very close-knit, so that you can get the the church choir to participate, and you can get the kids from the public school down there to come and sing. And, so it's a really good way of uniting the community around a project.
And the original production
during the centennial.
Yeah, and on top of all that, the original production had the Alvin Ailey Dance Company in the middle of all that, because I worked on the redo of it. But I love the perspective that now you can say that's the essence of my father in that piece, and I get it. I really get
so.
it. Yeah. Other productions. How many Candides did you see?
A lot. I mean, I don't remember how many I actually saw, but I know that there were so many productions of Candide all over the world, more than have ever been. So that was thrilling. And then, of course, and all the shows, were being seen and heard all over the place. And now West Side Story is also having another resurgence.
Right.
Even though we're well past the official centennial period, there was this Broadway revival of West Side Story, which is on hiatus at the moment, obviously, along with every other Broadway show. But it will come back, probably in the
whenever,
spring.
yeah.
They're hoping in the spring.
Also, I was going to ask you, although I know it's not good to say, but Steven Spielberg's movie, which I think is scheduled to come out around Christmas, is that right?
That is the plan, but
Right.
they're just trying to hedge their bets. I'm sure you and everybody who's listening to us has experienced COVID time and the way you can't make a plan about anything.
Right.
Because we don't know the answers to anything. We don't
Correct.
know how long the lockdown will last, how long. We just don't know anything.
Right.
So it's very hard, for example, to plan the opening of a major motion picture. How do you even do that?
But at least principal photography was finished, so that But I don't know if all the recording was done. But
there's a little more music left to record, not too much. It's basically done. The movie is basically done. So mainly, it's a question of when they're going to release it, and they just can't decide until the last minute, because it all depends on what's going on in the world, which we just don't know from minute to minute.
Yeah. Well, right. I'm looking forward to it. And everybody that I know who what I say, snuck a peek, was involved in some peripheral way, whatever. Everybody has sort of had one of those guardedly enthusiastic comments about it. So I'm really, really looking forward to it.
I went to a few of the shoot days and recording sessions for the music, and we were just beside ourselves. So I'm trying to stay very calm.
Right. Well, that's what I was trying to.
It might be a while before we see it on a screen, but boy, when that day comes, everybody's going to be very excited. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I have a theory about Candide. I want to go back to Candide for a second, because I actually worked on a production that was the summer your father was working on Mass. And I think my father, who was working on Mass, wanted your father to get the hell out of San Francisco and Candide and get back to the MacDowell colony or somewhere to finish Mass. But so I have great affection for Candide. And and as each book of Stephen Sondheim's lyrics come out, we find more pieces that were written originally for Candide that ended up in West Side Story.
That's true.
My theory about Candide is that they were all goofs, that nothing was important to your father. He just was having fun, frivolous fun, cranking out barcarolles, cranking out, this is cranking. And because there's such a freedom to the music in Candide.
Yeah. And I guess at that moment in his life, the faucets were just on all the way. The stuff was just pouring out of him. And really, he was writing Candide and West Side Story kind of simultaneously, which is unbelievable to contemplate. And what's equally unbelievable to contemplate is that there was the cross-pollination at all, because what could be more different? The Candide score is this, as is referred to, Leonard Bernstein's Valentine to Europe,
right? Because
of how it uses all these different European song and dance forms. As you said, the barcarolle, but there's a schottische, and there's a bolero, and there's a little of everything in there.
And Robernia is in there.
Right, Rovno Gubernia. And the tango, the old ladies' tango, which is really a sort of, Eastern European boot thudding stomp of a song. But anyway, how could any of that score find a comfortable slot in West Side Story, which is all about, Latin Caribbean music and bebop jazz? Like, how did anything fit in there? And yet it did. So do you know the two songs that started in Candide and ended up in West Side Story?
Well, Make of Our Heart is one, but then Officer Krupke was my surprise.
Yes, that's the surprise.
It's like, Officer Krupke, really?
Right. And then it began, where does it get you in the end? In the end, in the end, in the end, at the very end. That's how it went in Candide. It was in like the casino scene.
Right. Venice. The Venice scene.
Yeah. It's amazing to contemplate. And then it wound up very comfortably as Officer Krupke in West Side Story. But that musical form is really vaudeville. Right. And so you can kind of push that in anywhere, I guess.
But there's a spirit about those things. Also, in your book, you pointed out that some original opening of West Side Story ended up in, is it Chichester Psalms? There was something he used later on.
Right.
Yeah.
So the original opening number in West Side Story was this mess called Mix. Mix, make a mess of them, make the sons of bitches pay, make a mess of them, there'll be less of them, there'll be less of them. Those are very hard words to say, and that's just not problem number one.
Right.
And the other problem was it was just not a good beginning.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting is that in the end, they decided to go with music that had no lyrics at all. The music that is the actual prologue of West Side Story used to have lyrics too. How long does it take to reach the moon, a Rooney? And with this weird sort of, surreal dialogue that the Jets are having with each other, all cut. And it wound up just being the music and Jerry Robbins' choreography.
Yeah.
Which was, of course, genius.
Well,
but anyway, so that original tune, Mix, ended up in the second movement of Chichester Psalms.
Yeah.
After the boy alto sings, "The Lord is my shepherd" in Hebrew, and it's all very innocent and bucolic, and then all of a sudden these men's voices go, "Bah, lamaragashu, lamaragashu goyim, lamaragashu," and they're singing about why do the nations rage. So it's about peace versus war. So that music found its perfect resting place for sure.
Yeah, along with some wonderful melodies that were going to be in Skin of Our Teeth, I believe. And just
right. Yeah. That was another show, a show that my father was writing with Betty Comden and Adolph Green that was stillborn. It just did not come to term.
Yeah.
And it just never really was completed. And so it fell apart in the same year that my father was commissioned to write a piece for this festival in Chichester, England, at the cathedral. And the dean of Chichester Cathedral, Walter Hussey, requested, could it please sound a little bit like his favorite show, West Side Story? That was his request. And then in the end, he got an actual fragment.
Right. He got what he asked for.
Boy, did he get what he asked for.
I think that's great. I picked a couple of little things out of your book that I thought were great. It might be fun to talk about. The Gas Symphony.
Here's to you, Ted, by the way.
Thank you.
A glass of wine. I hope nobody minds.
Yeah, good to know. The Gas Symphony. Tell us about the Gas.
Oh, the Gas Symphony. This is another story I tell in my book, because I was just the right age when this happened. I guess I was about 11. And the gas company, which used to have ads on TV in which they referred to themselves as your gas company, invited my father to write the Gas Symphony, for which they would offer him $1 million. $1 million. And back in those days, that was a ton of money. A ton of money. But in my family, we are very devoted to all things having to do with, bodily gaseous emissions. And we talk about it a lot, and we think it's a really funny thing. And so the fact that our dad was asked to write the Gas Symphony, oh my God, we were just in paroxysms of hilarity and all the jokes, oh, think of what the tubas can do. And then, and the bassoons and so like, it was just our gag for weeks. And my brother and I thought, you should do it, Daddy, because you'll make so much money and then we'll be really rich. But he was holding off on giving them an answer. And in the interim, by way of wooing him to do it, they invited us. They invited my father, and Alexander and I got to go along, to go to the 1964 World's Fair in Flushing, New York, in Long Island, in New York, basically, Queens, in New York City. And he got us to go along, and we were helicoptered there from Bridgeport, Connecticut, right near the house where I am right now. So we had this unbelievable day where we got helicoptered to the World's Fair, and then we were given lunch at the gas pavilion. You can imagine the jokes we made about the gas pavilion and what happens to your, digestive tract when you eat lunch at the gas pavilion. But anyway, and then they took us to all the rides and all the exhibits, and we didn't have to wait on those 2-hour lines. So we basically had the time of our lives. And then we were flown back over the Long Island Sound at sunset. And Alexander and I were just, bedazzled with this incredible day we'd had. And then we got home, and then our dad told the gas company, no thanks. Guess I won't like the gas symphony.
But you got the day at the World's Fair, and I stood on some of those lines. I know how long they were.
Right? Yeah.
I have to say, you are extraordinarily gracious in your book about the times in your growing up and your parents' life that were not a lot of fun. And I think it's really a testament to you to be able to be as honest as you are about the various things. I thought a lot about your mother first, because I remember her as sort of extraordinarily gracious and glamorous, and I know my father, adored her. But
they adored each other.
She signed up for perhaps a little more than she anticipated.
I think she thought she could do it, and she pulled it off beautifully, but it cost her a lot. And the thing about every family has ups and downs, of course. That's just the human condition. And our family was no different. But when you have a sort of larger than life figure in your family, it makes the ups upper and the downs downer. But it's still the same quality of up and down that you have in any family. So if I was going to write about my family, I certainly wasn't just going to tell the good parts and not tell the other parts, because then it wouldn't have been real. So I had to talk about what my mother went through and how difficult it was for her to be, as we called it, or she called it, Mrs. Maestro. Mm-hmm. And there were tremendous advantages and gifts that came along with being that person. But it was also incredibly draining and ultimately quite punishing. And she suffered a lot, and it probably didn't do her health any favors, and we lost her very early. So.
And I also think the portrait of your father, because it is true that one of the connections that my father and your father had was the office, because my father was there at the time of focusing his various activities into an office called Amberson, which then is still in existence today under the different name. But I thought of your father because recently there was a wonderful documentary on Nina Simone, who at one point, when she was sort of breaking down, she said to the interviewer, I have 19 people who are dependent on me. And in a funny way, I kind of got the feeling in your book that as things went on, there was a big machinery that had to be fed, and your father was push, and go do this, go do that, write this,
Yeah, I think that's very true. And your father's successor in the job of being my father's manager, Harry Kraut, really, ratcheted up the machinery to an unprecedented level of intensity. And so there came a moment where, my father was sort of compelled to keep going at this insane pace in order to keep the machine running.
Yeah.
And it was all very rewarding in many ways. I mean, it's always rewarding to be a very good conductor of very good orchestras because the audiences adore it and you get your reaction immediately. So it's very gratifying. And so my father loved his work, but it was exhausting and it was relentless. And then, of course, there was the other side of him who was the composer. And that side of him had to be alone and contemplative and turned inward and be up all night, with the manuscript paper in front of the piano and try to pull those notes out of the ether. And that side of him had a harder and harder time expressing itself because he had to work so hard doing the other stuff, which he also loved, but he had to do both. So he just went slamming back and forth, driving himself crazy and exhausting himself. And all of that was very difficult for my mother as well.
Yeah. I think talk a little bit about the Black Panther thing, because again, this is something I loved. You have a very good turn of phrase in the way you talked about Tom Wolfe like a python slowly swallowing a live rabbit, that he wasn't invited, he was there, but saw to it that he was going to turn that thing against your parents in ways that were not only not fair, but kind of devastating.
They were not fair, but it made his career.
Yeah.
When that article came out in New York Magazine, it put him and the magazine on the map. And then some months later, it came out as part of that book called Radical Chic.
Yeah.
So at that point, he got what he wanted. But I don't think he gave too much thought to what his snarky little article would do to the family. And he completely misrepresented what this event was about. And I am resigned to spending the rest of my life correcting the record on this thing.
Yeah.
So, it was not, he called it, Lenny's party. It wasn't a party. It was a fundraising event. B, it wasn't Lenny's. It was my mother's fundraising event. She did a lot of work for the ACLU and for the Committee for Public Justice. And she was very involved in all the issues that they were covering in the day. This was in January of 1970. And at that time, 21 Black Panthers had been thrown in jail waiting for a trial to come up that they were all accused in, allegedly having plots to bomb Bloomingdale's, or the whole thing was so cockamamie. And in fact, when the trial finally came around, the judge instantly threw it out because it was so preposterous and trumped up by somebody. But anyway, meantime, these 21 guys were stuck in jail, and what were their families going to do, and who was going to keep them fed and clothed and make sure the kids were in school, and So that was what my mother was raising money for, was the defense fund for the 21 Panthers in jail, which included taking care of their families. That's what she was doing. It wasn't so much that she was necessarily advocating for everything that the Black Panthers did or stood for, but she knew injustice when she saw it. And she knew that they had been thrown in jail for complete nonsense. And all of this, of course, resonates as never before today.
Oh, yes.
It was the same old, same old. It was absolutely the same old stuff. And then there was this added layer, awful layer, which was that after the event took place and was misrepresented by Tom Wolfe and by another journalist who snuck in uninvited, who was Charlotte Curtis, the society editor of the New York Times. She was not invited, but she snuck in, and wrote this really snarky thing about this event on the society page. And then the New York Times had an op-ed piece excoriating the Bernsteins for supporting the Black Panthers and how that was compromising the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, it was a big, what we now would call a shitstorm.
Yeah.
And it was completely misunderstood. But then, so my father started, because of course it all seemed to be his party, right? So he was getting all the hate mail, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters coming in a day of hate mail. Plus, the Jewish Defense League was picketing in front of our apartment building because the Panthers were purportedly anti-Zionist. So the Jewish Defense League was protesting that Leonard Bernstein was supporting this allegedly anti-Zionist group. What we eventually found out, not until the 1980s, when my father was finally able to view his own FBI file through the Freedom of Information Act, that's where he discovered that the FBI generated those hate letters. And they completely infiltrated the picketers outside our building in the Jewish Defense League. The whole thing was being engineered and manipulated by the FBI because it was to the FBI's advantage to pit one minority group against another, thereby disempowering them both. So it was perfect for them that, you know, Jew against black, and then they're mad at each other. That means they won't gang up and vote for the same person. Right? That was the agenda. And I dare say the agenda has not changed at all.
I was going to say how nice to know that that's completely disappeared from our world. Not. Well, thank you. That's it. I mean, that whole thing has always bothered me, and you've articulated what it was all about, and I appreciate that. To go back to the more fun stuff, having come through the successful centennial of your father's work, if you could, I mean, what's on your wish list of bringing Leonard Bernstein forward? Things that, you know, that people maybe don't know about him, works that they don't know about him. What's the next chunk of Leonard Bernstein?
Yeah, that's
legacy?
A great question. And it's very timely because we just are about to put out our twice-a-year newsletter, Prelude, Fugue, and Riffs. I'm sure you read it.
I read it from cover to cover. I love it.
Oh, good. Well,
and it comes in paper through the mail. I'm sorry. I love it.
I know. And I'm very sorry to tell you that this
is the last one.
Is the last paper one.
Well, it's the last paper one. Send it online. I'll be fine. Just
yeah, it'll be online, but it's not the same. I know. I couldn't agree more. But we were, you know, times are changing and paper is expensive, and we just had to go digital. We had to. But this last issue is glorious because it's our last one. We gave it our all, and it has a big article about what we hope to be doing going forward as the Leonard Bernstein office and the family, and what are we hoping to see going forward. So it speaks directly to your question. And there are many things, but I would say the chief among them is that our dad's compositions should be heard in the world. And that's all going very well. We are hoping that our dad's legacy will be something that young people learn about and embrace. So there's that. And that's very important. You know, most kids today don't know who Leonard Bernstein is. And we're really hoping that that will change, and it will. And one of the ways it will is because of that Steven Spielberg film of West Side Story. That is going to help a lot in that department. Also, his educational legacy is something we care about a lot. And my brother, Alexander, whom you saw earlier, has worked very hard over the years to develop this amazing educational model called artful learning. And artful learning, it's not just putting arts in the schools. It's much more holistic. It's about using the arts and the spirit of creativity to infuse the entire school curriculum and interconnect everything that everybody is studying, and invites the kids, the students, to create things themselves that express what they are learning in their classes. It's fantastic. And the kids love it, and the teachers love it, and the parents get involved, and everybody gets happy, and the kids' scores go up. And so artful learning is a big deal and is doing great in this world and expanding. So we're really hoping that the artful learning thing will catch on even more and continue our dad's legacy as an educator. So that's just a few things right there.
That's great. I realized I didn't have this clicked correctly, so we have a question I want to ask you before we wrap up here about his time at Tanglewood with the Boston Symphony. Can you speak a little bit about his time there and how important it was?
Yes, and in fact, it's it's a perfect question today because I was just at Tanglewood yesterday. I actually got a job that involved going somewhere and doing something in real life. It was so exciting. So the Tanglewood folks, Tony Fogg, who is the artistic administrator, invited me to be the presenter for this series of archival concerts that they're going to be presenting online over the course of the summer to take the place of an actual Tanglewood summer season. So they're going to have all these fantastic concerts from back in the day with all sorts of pieces and conductors and soloists, really cool, splashy stuff. And they invited me to do the intros and outros of each presentation. So I actually did that yesterday, standing on the porch outside the main house at Tanglewood, you know, with the birds chirping and the lawn over there and the beautiful lake down the hill. And it was so emotional to finally, you know, be A, out of the house, and B, doing something useful with human beings, and C, being back at Tanglewood, which was my father's happy place.
Right. For many years, right?
Pardon?
For many years.
All the years, basically. Yeah. He was first there when it began as a student back in the early 1940s. And he had such a wonderful time there as a student that he went back forevermore as a teacher. Because for him, teaching and learning were basically one continuous cycle of experience. And, you know, when he learned something, he had to immediately turn around and share it because he was excited. Right. So teaching and learning, learning and teaching. So his favorite thing was to go to Tanglewood every summer, rehearse and perform with the Boston Symphony, rehearse and perform with the kids orchestra, and then stay up all night with the students and yak about everything and sing songs around the piano and you know, just be with the kids. That was his favorite thing. So Tanglewood is everything. And there I was yesterday.
That's great. And appropriately, his final concert was at Tanglewood, was it not?
That's right. That's really where his final concert should have been, and it was. And he performed with literally his last breath, virtually his last breath.
Yeah.
Beethoven's Seventh. And what a performance it was.
Wow.
Great. But he was so not well. Yeah. His lungs were just not working.
I do remember I was in a boys' choir in Philharmonic Hall early on, and I'll never forget this. He was conducting, and one of the brass players splatted at one point. And as he's bucolically conducting, and he looks and gives the guy a hairy eyeball, and then just goes right back into it.
That's so him. Or sometimes he did this, I'm smelling something funny face. He would go,
yeah, right. What's that all about? But those folk out there didn't see that.
No.
Anyway. I think we've come to the end of our time.
Yeah, I still need a little daylight to go pick some greens out of the garden so I can.
There's dinner time.
Yeah.
So Jamie, the other Jamie's here.
Other Jamie, yes.
Hi, Jamie.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for this wonderful discussion.
It was really fun.
I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say how much I enjoyed it. Thank you all of the people watching in YouTube land. Thank you for joining us. And just as a reminder, you can check out Jamie's book here, dun, 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 and you can check out all of our events here. Both of those we've got a picture of the book there.
Oh, thank you, Ted. Thank you.
Recommended. Both those.
And by the way, if you prefer to listen to a book, I did the audiobook as well.
Oh, great. And I think you can purchase the, oops, sorry. You didn't see that. You can purchase the audiobook at our online bookstore too. Great. So lots of options. And yeah, so thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you again soon. Bye everyone.
Ted, thank you so much.
Yeah, are you kidding?
It was great.
This is great. Now we get to talk offline a little bit.